Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. National Park Service staff have flagged dozens of informational signs the public sees about Native American history. It's part of a directive by President Donald Trump to eliminate any portrayals of history that paint Americans in a bad light. There's no word on who is making the final decisions or what information will be cut, but Native historians worry it's a step backwards for accurate Native perspectives. We'll hear more after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Antonia Gonzalez. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services announced more than 70 public health officers are being deployed to Indian Health Service facilities across the country. IHS has faced staffing shortages serving Native Americans and Alaska Natives. Reporter Carol Ann Duro has more.
In a request for comment, Indian Health Service Chief Medical Officer Dr. Loretta Christensen shared that nurses, providers, pharmacists, social workers, lab medical technologists, and engineers would be filling shortages at their facilities. When asked about their preparedness, Dr. Christensen responded that all officers would be receiving orientation upon arrival. Abigail Echohawk, director of the Urban Indian Health Institute, provides insight on their training.
There has been a consistent gap at IHS in providing culturally based onboarding and education for individuals who are new to Indian country.
However, Echohawk shares that there is progress being made after the IHS visited her organization, Seattle Indian Health Board, to observe their cultural onboarding system. RFK Jr., Secretary of Health and Human Services, says this is a part of their initiative to make America healthy again, which Echohawk says has been lacking.
Indian country has been just responding to the immediate changes that have been made across HHS.
Deployments of the public officers will be assigned equally across northern and southern IHS facilities. For National Native News, I'm Carol Ann Duro.
A Tlingit master weaver is using viral monster dolls called Labubus to bring attention to Chilkat and Ravenstail weaving. KTOO's Yvonne Crumray saw the regalia-clad dolls herself and has more.
In Lily Hope's shop in downtown Juneau, she holds up a tiny doll with an evil grin.
Some people are like, why? Oh, please, no, why? What an ugly monster. And other people are like, oh, please let me have one.
Her shop is filled with pieces of weaving, earrings, form-line robes, and pictures of models in more weaving. On her desk lies a green doll wearing a raven's tail headdress, woven in pink, white, and blue yarn.
This one is Trans Pride, requested from an art collector in New York City.
Hope is a master weaver. She's dedicated her life to reviving Chilkat and Ravenstail weaving, and through apprenticeships and classes, she's helped hundreds of Alaska Native people form their own weaving practice. She's also a mom of 5, and those two worlds collided when her kids started asking for Labubus.
My 3 small children introduced me to the dolls and said, please, mommy, buy these for us.
You may have heard of them. The dolls are all over the internet with their fuzzy bodies, big, colorful eyes, and pointy teeth. They're based on storybook characters. Hope says they come in blind boxes, generic packaging that leaves the contents a mystery. So part of the fun is finding which Labubu is in the box.
Oh yes, this is the whole rage, right? It's like, oh, I got lychee berry. Oh, I got the green grape. Oh, now we need to get soy milk, Mama. Let's get soy milk.
But in the craze, she saw an opportunity to continue to push Northwest Coast weaving into the spotlight.
When somebody sees an indigenized Labubu in a Ravenstail regalia, they can be like, oh, where does that come from? Oh, what are those? Oh, what is Ravenstail weaving? It's related to Chilkat? Let's go.
Hope's doll-sized regalia sets go for more than $600, and fine arts collectors all over the country are ordering them. But for those who don't want to shell out that much, Hope also sells kits, so people can weave their own outfits for a doll.
It's a way to get the work further into the world and kind of, capture some people who wouldn't necessarily come to Ravenstail weaving otherwise, but are like, oh, this is a way that I can dress my Labubu in traditional regalia, and I made it myself. That's huge.
It's a way of weaving your own story into the trend. And the little monsters look pretty cool, too. In Juneau, I'm Yvonne Crumry.
And I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support by Sonosky Chambers Law, championing tribal sovereignty and Native American rights since 1976. From opioids litigation to treaty rights to tribal self-governance. With offices in Washington, D.C., New Mexico, California, and Alaska. Sonosky Chambers Law.
Now more than ever, the supporters of this and all Native One programs deserve a little extra love. Learn more about all our public radio underwriters and web-based sponsors at koahnic.org/supporters-spotlight.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. The Trump administration is actively reviewing hundreds of informational signs at national parks for what it calls improper ideology. The New York Times reports that among information flagged as potentially disparaging toward Americans is text at the Russian bishop's house in Sitka, Alaska, explaining how missionaries worked to destroy indigenous cultures and languages. A panel at Florida's Castillo de San Marcos National Monument is being questioned for including text about forced assimilation of Native Americans. The review is going on at parks, museums, and other institutions and is generating questions about who makes the decisions about how historical events are portrayed. Has your tribal community assisted parks to get historical information included in signage or in displays? Is there a benefit to portraying history in a more positive and patriotic context? Give us a call, 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. We've got the phone lines open in our Albuquerque studio right now. Producers are standing by, waiting for your call, 1-800-99-NATIVE. Let's now meet today's guests. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is Michaela Pavlot. She is the Indigenous Partnerships Program Manager for the National Parks Conservation Association, and she is a member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians. Michaela, hello, and welcome to Native America Calling.
Ani, thank you for having me.
Joining us from St. Louis, Missouri is Julie Reed. She is an associate professor of history at the University of Tulsa and a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. Julie, hello to you as well, and welcome to our show.
For having me.
Joining us from Sacramento, California is Morningstar Glee. She is the Executive Director of Indigenous Justice and the California Tribal and Community Liaison for the International Indian Treaty Council. She is a member of the Pitt River Tribe. Morningstar, welcome back to Native America Calling. Good morning, and also happy California Native American Day.
Tuzi Matikcha, happy California Native American Day. Thank you so much for having me on again.
Absolutely. And joining us from Silva, North Carolina, we have Kimberly Smith. She is the Community Conservation Specialist for the Wilderness Society, and she is an enrolled member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. Kim, welcome to Native America Calling. It's great to have you on the show today.
Shio, thank you for having me.
Shio, sister from Western North Carolina. Michaela, I'm going to go ahead and begin the show with you. And please bring our listeners up to date. What is currently happening with this effort to remove signage from National Park Service lands?
Thank you. Yeah, so back in January, we've seen initiatives from the administration asking for restoring history through truth and sanity. So what we're seeing in our national parks is a review of panels of interpretation of parks that are created to tell our stories. That's one thing why I was drawn to national parks, is because not just our beautiful landscapes, it's the powerful storytelling. And as an Indigenous woman, I know a lot of that is our history. It's the Indigenous voice that is shared through the national park system. And to see the process of evaluating and taking down signage. We saw it early on with the LGBTQ site in New York, taking down significant pieces of telling these diverse stories in history. And just recently, after the review of the QR codes, we're seeing the push for Park Service and park staff to take action to change signs, which is really sanitizing our history. So we are at risk of losing crucial stories and also wiping away decades of hard work by experts in national parks, incredible staff, and the hard work of collaborating and consulting with tribal nations and the efforts that tribal people put forward to have their stories told in the parks, to designate specific parts to protect these spaces and their stories that all these landscapes really hold.
Okay. Michaela, you just mentioned Park Service staff, and of course, we know that these directives are coming from Washington, D.C., from the presidential administration, but they're in the actual parks on ground level here. Who is giving the actual orders to take down these specific signs or edit them in any way?
It does seem to be coming from, the Washington office and the Department of Interior. There are specific secretary orders calling for the signs to come down. It is oftentimes unclear of exactly the intention behind it, other than just a broad stroke of sanitizing.
Are there any guidelines with regard to what information that NPS is instructed to flag?
Based off of in the executive order, it's anything that has, and I'm quoting, partisan ideology or to move comment that would disparage Americans. So it is to be more of, this positive, patriotic, which we know the harm of that. It's avoiding mistakes or acknowledging the harder parts of history just in the name of, again, to wash it away, to sanitize our history.
Well, Michaela, some people listening to the show right now might be thinking to themselves, well, okay, these are signs at a park. Not everybody might go to these parks. Some of them might be in obscure locations. Maybe it's not that big a deal, but can you tell us what kind of work goes into creating these signs? What type of research has to go into making sure that the information is put down correctly? And even just logistically, building these signs, printing them, creating whatever materials or whatever goes into making them, installing them, all of that work as well.
Yeah, of course. Even just the creation of a park starts that work. The act of Congress, they put intentional language in there to tell the stories of the indigenous peoples, right? We see this with massacre sites. We see this with sacred sites. There is intention behind even just the creation of the park to protect the space and protect the stories. And then that kicks off when it's passed, it kicks it to the park staff. The experts of anthropologists, cultural resource managers that build these projects and collaborate with tribal nations, with community members. So it's an all-across effort with federal staff, reaching the community and the people who should be telling those stories. Mm-hmm. So it's years of public comment, of consultation, the research and the time of, specifically tribal historic preservation officers that are tasked with that are sent that consultation, and the effort of tribal members and leaders to share their stories. And all of that to then, and we have the celebrations of opening new interpretation centers that are telling the accurate stories, even more so now, including indigenous language. And the thought of that just being covered up is again, it's really also insulting to the hard work of all these knowledge holders and researchers.
Okay. Thank you, Michaela. Julie Reed, I want to bring you into the conversation now. And please tell us, how important are these federal institutions to the public's understanding of history? And also, how important are they to you as a professor of history?
Sure. Well, just thinking about an organization that impacts the five tribes and Cherokee specifically is the Trail of Tears Association, which has been doing incredible work for decades to draw attention to the horrors of Indian removal, right? And that it's only been in the last few years that the Trail of Tears Association has really expanded its view beyond Cherokee removal to think about the other four of the five tribes. And so now you have Choctaw people coming to the table. And I'm like, we're just on the cusp of telling a much bigger story of Indian removal that moves us beyond just Cherokees, that expands our understanding of what that means. And one of the best partners on that project has been the national parks. So it raises real questions about, to Michaela's point about the ways that this potentially shuts down the trust building and all of the decades of work that community organizations have done, and the trust building that has happened with national parks employees that takes time, and the kind of long-term ramifications of what happens when those relationships break down. There's also a lot of resources that NPS produces that are used by K through 12 educators in wider public school systems, maps that show up everywhere that help us better understand a particularly dark period in the early Republic. And so I think this is taking us back to a place that many of us who are from our communities really thought we were through. Added to that, I think this is also, I think about my own research has been impacted by this because I had an NEH pulled by DOGE. And the argument that I was given was that my project was DEI. And I said, my project is American history. And so there are real consequences for researchers that are not even just directly connected to this particular executive order, but the kind of larger rolling back of the work that those of us who are in institutions and are collaborating with our Native nations, or non-Indigenous scholars collaborating with Native nations, that it runs the risk of shutting much of that down.
Okay.
And
Presidential administration actively reviewing hundreds of informational signs at national parks for what it calls improper ideology. Let us know what you think of that. Improper ideology. How do you feel? 1-800-99-NATIVE. Give us a call. The state of Texas moved to redraw voting district lines to favor Republicans. That has major implications for who represents the tribal citizens who reside there. But it also sets in motion a potential cascade of voting changes in other states that could have a big impact on midterm elections a year from now. We'll find out about what's at play in redistricting on the next Native America Calling.
Support provided by Amerind. Amerind is 100% tribally owned and partners with tribes and their businesses to provide affordable commercial insurance coverage, protect tribal sovereignty, and strengthen Native American communities by helping to keep dollars in Indian country. Information about property, liability, commercial auto, and workers' comp available at amerind.com. That's AMERIND.com.
Thank you for listening to Native America Calling. We are talking about President Trump's directive to, in his words, restore truth and sanity to American history. Has the negative context about how Native Americans have been treated throughout history gone overboard? Let us know. We're at 1-800-996-2848. We value your perspective, so give us a call, 1-800-99-NATIVE. And we have our first caller of the day on the line right now. This is Jarek, who is listening online in Juneau, Alaska. Good morning, Jarek. You are on the air.
Yeah, okay, Sutat. My name is Jarek Copelang, and I'm calling you from Juneau, Alaska. I wanted to express my concerns about what's going on. First of all, I would state that my late grandmother, Dr. Ellen Hope Hayes, was the first superintendent who was a Kiksati woman, who are the people who staged the Battle of 1802 and 1804 in Sitka. And I did cultural interpretation at Sitka National Historical Park in 2018 when the compact between the Sitka Tribe of Alaska and the National Park Service allowed for cultural interpretation from Indigenous people. So this area is really important to me. And I'm concerned about this revisionist history, and more importantly, what the takeaway is for people who are visiting the park. We also store our sacred items there from the Battle of 1804. So I think it's time for us to reconsider what we're doing with the park. And it's my understanding right now that the national park there is run by a Native woman. The superintendent is Native. So it's concerning. I don't think it's just the Russian colonial history that needs to be discussed, but there's also, Sitka National Historical Park has the cottage community, which is the precursor to Sheldon Jackson and boarding schools.
Okay.
And yeah.
Jarek, your grandmother, I believe you said Ellen Hope Hayes. Tell us a little bit more about her. How long was she the director of that park?
Well, there was a culturally interpretive program through art with the Southeast Alaska Indian Cultural Center, which is now defunct and not running, but it was a demonstrating artist program. So she started as a receptionist and worked her way to superintendent and retired from there. So it's difficult to hear this because so many of our ancestors spent a lot of time really dismantling this revisionist history and telling truthful and honest history, even if it's painful.
All right.
So it's difficult to hear because these people's work is important and it's in our day-to-day lives today. And I'm just disappointed to hear this.
Sure. Jarek, really appreciate you calling us today and sharing that little bit of family history with our listeners. 1-800-996-2848. That is the number to call for anyone else who would like to join our conversation today. Let us know what your thoughts are with regard to what's happening with signage and other public displays in national parks and some of these other public spaces. Our guest on the line right now is Julie Reed, who is an associate professor of history at the University of Tulsa. And Julie, listening to this caller just now, Jarek, and listening to you and Michaela earlier, really begs the question also, do you see any connections between the directives that we're seeing from the current presidential administration and what has traditionally been portrayed in history books?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that I've just put forward an essay where thinking about John Ross as a Cherokee speaker, which has been completely eliminated from most public signage, that he's basically listed as, well, he's mostly a white man, as if his Cherokee identity didn't matter. And that was a trope that has lived with us in K through 12 education that is often out there. And we're going to a place where non-Native people are going to be interpreting our history and deciding for us what gets put forward. And there's real dangers in misunderstanding who we are as communities, as families, as towns. And this runs real risks. We have plenty of examples in history of local communities kind of taking ownership, national celebratory stories that kind of take people away from our communities, interpret them in ways that are inconsistent with how we understand them, and that takes often decades to correct. So I think we're in a really delicate moment right now where lots of good work by so many good people could get rolled back. And I just think about how long does it take to build trust between institutions and communities, and that this has been a hard battle for those of us who care about these things to watch it unravel and to see our own family histories get rewritten. Even thinking about, to the point of boarding schools, that we're barely raising consciousness right now about the legacies of boarding schools in the United States. And now we are potentially being told that history may or may not be appropriate because it's negative. That these are our family histories. And so to suggest that our own families don't fit in to what it means to be American, I think is a larger problem in how we interpret what is democracy. What is this country that we say we are a part of? How can we have these certain views of our history if we're leaving out whole swaths of who we are and who we have been for millennia, if you're eliminating Native peoples?
Okay. A noted disclosure, we did reach out to the National Park Service and the U.S. Department of Interior for comment about today's show. We did not get a response by showtime today. Julie, the focus today, of course, are these national parks and other spaces with federal support, federal funding. But do you see a trend of rewriting history at other types of institutions, perhaps non-federal museums or parks, state parks, municipal parks outside of the federal sphere?
Well, I think, I always think one of the dangers in these moments is that you've got these kind of nebulous executive orders, right? What does it mean to be negative, right? Like that isn't clearly defined. And so it leaves people on the ground left to interpret and potentially be fired, potentially be have real consequences around their jobs, their livelihoods, and that what we're starting to see is kind of a reaction to what could happen as opposed to what has happened. And then I think added to that, if we think about these larger funding sources that have been that are drying up, that some of the best partners with Native nations are local communities. And so if you pull funding from the Missouri Historical Society, or you pull funding from local community museums, that we're missing an opportunity to have really close relationships within our communities that are shared histories in those places. So we are seeing a kind of reaction to this that is maybe overstepping perhaps what maybe that we're winding up policing ourselves in some places, and that's a real concern when you're dealing with these nebulous kinds of criteria that aren't clearly spelled out.
Julie, as a history professor, do you feel a responsibility to respond to these events?
I mean, I feel a responsibility to continue doing the work, that doesn't change, and that if anything, it makes me feel even more impassioned about my own community's history. I mean, I also think of this, that if a nation like the Cherokee Nation, which is better off than many, has a lot of clout, has a certain kind of voice, but what do we do for tribes that don't have the same resources, the same voices, the same kinds of apparatuses? That there are lots of Native nations that don't all have the same kinds of institutional backdrops against what's happening right now. And so I think we all have a responsibility in this moment to really think about the ramifications, not only for our own communities, but for communities around us.
All right, we've got the phone lines open right now for anyone who would like to join the conversation. 1-800-996-2848. That is our number, 1-800-996-2848. And we have another caller on the line right now. This is Michelle, who is listening on Keeley Radio in the Black Hills of South Dakota. Hello, Michelle, and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Sean. He honey wash day. I just had to comment on this one, listen every day, so thank you so much. I was a park ranger at Sand Creek Massacre National Historic Site in southeast Colorado in 2007, the year that it opened. And as I was listening to you and your guests, I went to the nps.gov/sand website, and it's in the name, Sand Creek Massacre. And the website, when you open it, it's right there, Betrayal on the Plains and American Atrocity. And that's the truth. So, I'm kind of remembering some of the history. Silas Sewell was one of the soldiers, and he refused to fire on the people there. So we can act up, so to speak, now in that same way and refuse to go along with these changes. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Absolutely, Michelle. Thank you for calling in to the show. Keeley Radio listener in South Dakota, 1-800-99-NATIVE for anyone else who would like to join the conversation. Producers are standing by waiting for your call. And let's now move on to our next guest, Morningstar Gali. She is the Executive Director of Indigenous Justice and the California Tribal and Community Liaison for the International Indian Treaty Council, member of the Pitt River Tribe. And Morningstar, I want to talk to you about the New York Times and their review of documents from the National Park Service regarding what signs have been flagged, which have not. And they mentioned the Muir Woods in California. And of course, you are in Sacramento. What can you tell us about this area and why signs there to inform the public were flagged?
Sure. So the Muir Woods are located within the San Francisco Bay Area. It's on Ramaytush Ohlone territories, and it is a protected area. You need a permit to even be able to drive in. And so the changes that have been made in terms of the signage that's taken place there. There's also the efforts with Alcatraz Island of the retrofitting. It's a $50 million retrofitting project, as we've all heard on the news, in terms of Alcatraz now being opened up and being a prison again. And so these issues are really concerning in terms of what that means for us as local Native peoples and what this means for the general public to be able to access it, and the rewriting of history, as the other guests have mentioned, in a way that really neutralizes the history of what has occurred, and really continues to not only erase the language of what has occurred there, but erases us as Native peoples.
Morningstar, we heard Michaela earlier talk about all the work that goes into adding Native history to a place. And you've done work to change place names from offensive names to Native names, and that relates to our topic of including Native history. Can you tell us what kind of work goes into getting the place of a name changed?
Sure. So we worked on a bill through my organization, Indigenous Justice, AB 2022, which removed the S word from over 95 public place names in California. This was an effort in 2022 in the city of and county of Fresno. Fresno County was really insistent that they keep the S word, that they keep this derogatory word towards Native women. And they actually had a measure ballot that was put forward, Measure B, which we ended up defeating also. But there's a whole very challenging situation in this moment where it has been renamed to Yokuts Valley, and the public signs are consistently being defaced. There's large signage that's going up on private lands and private businesses that say S-Word Valley. They are very attached to it, and so it is a whole effort in terms of changing the geographical names, but it's also it was one step forward in terms of removing the S-word and then replacing the names back with traditional place names that again were erased. We worked on the signage for Alcatraz in terms of the occupation of 1969 to 1971, the 19-month-long occupation of many of our relatives that were involved in the takeover of Alcatraz Island. There's a really beautiful event that will be happening this weekend in terms of creating a cultural center exhibit taking place there on the island. But what does that look like when there's $50 million that has been put into the retrofit efforts, and now it is being opened up again to, with the, it's being opened up by the federal administration with the intention for it to be a prison on the island again. Tomorrow with National Park Service is the 100-year anniversary of the Lava Beds National Monument, and so that's celebrating the national monument at Lava Beds National State Park of celebrating that history of Modoc peoples. And they still continue to say that this is a Modoc war. I know there has been some efforts with local Modoc peoples in terms of changing that history. But when there were 50 people that were hiding out underground, and 20 of them were killed. Some of the leaders were sent to Alcatraz. Many of them were hung publicly. This is not a war. This was casualties and a genocide that happened against Modoc people. So there's lots of efforts still to move forward in terms of navigating through what the current signage and current climate is. And so this is really unfortunate, in terms of setbacks.
Sure, yeah. And Morningstar, all of these different efforts that you've described so far with regard to changing place names, what type of opposition did you face? What were the comments? What was the rhetoric? What were people saying with regard to people that didn't agree and wanted to maintain these names as they were?
There's lots of opposition in navigating these efforts, and in navigating the place names. We see this really as truth and history. And so when we were at the state capitol and we were lobbying for this bill and for these efforts in terms of truth and healing, we brought a group of young Native women with us, the Native Sister Circle, and there was a senator that was sympathetic, to the place name changes, but they made a comment to us and they said, well, if Indian women don't want to be called the S word, if they don't want to be called squaws, then what is it that we should call you? And so that just goes to show the dehumanization of us as Native peoples, how we are still today not seen as human, how the sexual violence that we make the effort to address through MMIP advocacy. This was one step forward, and there have been lots of challenges, not only by city and county officials, but also by local communities. We're going
to take a short break, and we'll be right back.
The annual 2025 Indian Nations Conservation Alliance National Conference happens October 14th in Las Vegas. This 3-day gathering of tribal leaders, professionals, youth, and community members unites voices and action around conservation, innovation, and indigenous stewardship of Indian lands and resources. The Indian National Finals Rodeo will be there too. Info and registration at inca-tcd.org. Inca supports this show.
We're glad you're with us today on Native America Calling. How do parks, public spaces, and institutions where you live include Native American history and information they display to the public? We are talking today about who gets to decide the historical information about violence, slavery, massacres, and forced removal of Native people. And there's still plenty of time for more listeners to join this conversation. We are at 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Our current guest, Morningstar Galley, is in Sacramento, California. And Morningstar, I want to ask you one more question before we bring in our next guest, Kim Smith. And the question is, what about Native voices in these discussions going forward? What are the avenues that are available to Native people like yourself and others who want a voice, who want to be stakeholders in these conversations and in these negotiations and in these just debates in some cases?
Thank you for that question. And yeah, I think that goes back to your initial question in terms of Muir Woods and, how those efforts with Muir Woods removed the signage that spotlighted Indigenous history, that spotlighted the contributions of women within the park, and and that even in this day and age, that an executive order can be put in place in terms of what that looks like for Native history. And so I think, names are really important. Our language is really important in terms of, having our traditional place names, in terms of having traditional signage. As I mentioned, we've worked on lots of tribal signage and ensuring that our stories are being told accurately. And so this is ongoing erasure. I say that every day as a California Indian woman is a fight against invisibility and a fight against erasure. And so here we are in this day and age still having to fight, to not only say that, we are here as strong Native peoples, but we are continuing, to fight this uphill battle of where it took so long to have a visibility and a presence, especially within national parks in California. To have that visibility and presence, I organized a sunrise gathering on Alcatraz Island. The sunrise gathering has taken place over the past 45 plus years in honor of the occupants that were there on the island. And this was started by Bill Wapapa back in the late 1970s. And so Bill Wapapa founded the first International Indian Treaty Council office in San Francisco. And we have a sunrise gathering that now over 5,000 people attend. We hold it every October and November on Indigenous Peoples Day and Indigenous Peoples Thanksgiving. And it really is, an effort to change that narrative and to shift that narrative in the reclaiming and retelling of the truth of who we are as Native peoples, to challenge those myths of Columbus and, that he was lost, and, all of those efforts that have been done with and made with Indigenous Peoples Day, and, with honoring the truth and history of Thanksgiving as the National Day of Mourning, as a day for Native peoples to and supporters to gather in this way publicly. And so here we are under threat now in terms of our First Amendment rights, in terms of our religious freedom rights, and being able to gather in these places and being able to hold gatherings and events in this time and in this moment.
Okay. Thank you, Morningstar. Back to the phones where we have Jolene, who is listening to Torch Radio. This is a tribal station that serves Lac de Flambeau in Wisconsin. Hello, Jolene. You're on the air.
Bonjour, bonjour, bonjour.
Bonjour.
I'm listening, and I'm thinking, we're the oldest culture in the world, older than any religion known to this date. And to allow our culture to be disseminated by non-Indians is a travesty.
What do you think our ancestors would be saying right now, Jolene?
They're angered.
Mm-hmm.
They're angered. I know.
All right. Okay. I guess we just lost Jolene. Sorry about that. Kimberly Smith is our next guest, and she joins us from Sylva, North Carolina. She is the Community Conservation Specialist for the Wilderness Society. And Kim, thank you again for joining the show. And let's learn more about the Wilderness Society. What type of work do you folks do, and how are you involved with the National Park Service to address Native American history?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to you, Sean, for holding space for this conversation, the other incredible women that are here today giving of their time and energy and the work that they're doing. So I want to start this dialogue from my seat with gratitude, because this is heavy work, and we have to honor and acknowledge the incredible people across the continent who are doing this work. I am grateful to be a part of the TWS family and be able to contribute to this national initiative through the resources that TWS can provide. It's a national NGO that works to protect our public lands, and it has a history of advocating for the recognition of Indigenous knowledge and leadership in the stewardship of public lands. And in the past few years, we've been working in relationship with several partners for the Renaming Place Names campaign. So TWS is one of those organizations that is amplifying Indigenous voices and its efforts from where it can support to preserve cultural heritage and foster respect to the history that shaped this country beyond 250 years ago. And that is a privilege that I have been given to work alongside these colleagues who are just as passionate and dedicated to this work.
Kim, there was a recent name change for a mountain located just adjacent to the Koala boundary. changed it to a Cherokee word. Tell us more about that.
Yes. So the power of Indigenous women, I cannot speak any more to the incredible resiliency of our women in our communities. A couple of years ago, during COVID, the conversation was sparked between two women in our community to address the offensive place name that was on one of our most sacred sites, the highest peak in our ancestral homelands. And throughout this process, these women championed the effort to restore our ancestral home name, Kawohi, to that site. And we've been working alongside the Eastern Band of Cherokee to create a space with our partners at the NPS and the Great Smokies to bring our babies back to the site through educational programming, to allow them to connect with the sacred place, to understand what the bond and relationship Cherokee people have had with that site. And it's been powerful to sit and witness hundreds of babies. We just had our last one last Tuesday, getting to witness them have their first introduction to this site and know that they're going to grow as adults in a more powerful and more present way, being able to connect to such a piece of who they are.
Mm-hmm. Kim, we saw earlier this year Mount Denali in Alaska. The presidential administration pushed to have that name changed back to Mount McKinley, which it was known as for a number of years. With changes like that, do you have any concerns about the name of this mountain there in North Carolina that is so sacred to your people?
I'll be honest, we're Indigenous. We have intergenerational trauma, fear from generations before with relationship to U.S. government decision making. Mm-hmm. I choose to live in optimism and know like there's a power in that sacred site, that the movement that it took, I mean, working at the federal level, there's a campaign that has been in efforts for 100 years to remove an offensive place name and give an ancestral name to that site. With Kawohi, it was a couple of years, and it moved through the Board of Geographic Names unanimously. And to see that kind of progress, I choose to give energy to that, to continue to try and grow that kind of progressive thinking, that kind of inclusive ideology. So while I am heartbroken when things are being rolled back in other places, I want to continue to give light to the progress we're making and the overwhelming love and attachment, even our non-Indigenous relatives who now share these mountains with us, the attachment they're growing to Kawohi. That's the kind of relationship building that gives me hope that the next generation will be able to have a relationship from birth to Kawohi in the ancestral way, learn about the progress it took to restore that name, and become another advocate to help other tribal nations, other marginalized communities find places of shared identity in our public lands.
Kim, it sounds like the push to change the name to Mount Kawohi was pretty quick. It sounded like it all transpired within a few years. But did you folks face any significant opposition, any pushback? And if so, what was it?
Well, there's always opposition with change. It's human nature to fear change. And opposition still comes, but it's more about education. I get to work with the Coalition for Outdoor Renaming and Education, the national collective of organizations and businesses who come together with the understanding we've got to share the knowledge. Knowledge is power. And every time we expand people's perspective to understand why a name change matters, why restoring an Indigenous name to a site is actually helpful for humanity, then we see that opposition fade. We see, especially locally, the embracing of understanding the full identity of place. I mean, Kauai was here before we were here. Kauai has trees that have witnessed change in the world beyond human migration, animal migration, and being able to help center people in that understanding and that perspective, we're inspiring people to not only care about the story that's told, but to care about the trees and the animals that live there. And, you know, hopefully they'll come to the table of conservation and preservation to help us steward the lands in a better way.
All right. Thank you, Kim. I want to circle back now to Michaela Pavlot. And Michaela, today on our show, we are hearing some very strong and passionate arguments in favor of keeping Native history intact in national parks. Tell us, this perspective, though, is it being heard by the people making decisions?
And I also just want to say, hearing the first two callers being former park staff and hearing their experience at those two sides, it is heartwarming. I feel for them, and we love our park rangers and thinking about all the hard times they're going through right now. So I just want to send those two love. But yeah, you know, when they try to go through the process to address the restore truth and sanity, they put up QR codes and to report of anything that was, you know, offensive or would, you know, not disparage American history. And over hundreds of those comments were asking for more Indigenous history. So those opportunities to share, right, the QR codes, to send those messages, that public engagement, they do read it.
Okay.
And it seems like they're ignoring it.
All right. Kim, back to you as we begin to wind down the show. What are some other sites that you are working on there with your partners? I understand there's a little bit of effort there in Asheville, North Carolina, to make some changes.
Yeah, so working with the coalition, working with the former Federal Advisory Committee for Reconciliation and Place Names, I've been able to get a better understanding of what does place names look like across the continent. And sadly, but not unsurprising, the Southeast has a lot of place names that need to be addressed. And, you know, again, doing this work in coalition, that is where we're seeing most change. That is where we're seeing a lot of people coming to the table with an open heart and an open mind. And the city of Asheville has been one of those amazing partners to really lean into honoring a collective history of place and moving forward in a way that's more inclusive. So recently we were able to remove the final portion of a monument that honored someone that was very well recognized for the infliction of harm that they had caused. And the city has been in efforts to redesign downtown in a way that tells a larger narrative of all of the people that call Dogiadsti, the Cherokee name for Asheville, home. So we've been able to be a part of the movement to remove that. Asheville's also suffered substantially from the recent natural disaster with the hurricane. So a lot of our work has shifted to supporting partners and getting back on their feet. And renaming place names has been a way to pull people together in camaraderie and looking forward to that restoration in a way that brings more healing to the community.
All right. That is it. We're out of time. So unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up our conversation, but I want to thank our guests today, Michaela Pavlot, Julie Reed, Morningstar Galley, and Kimberly Smith. And please join us next week for another lineup of conversations about Indigenous issues and topics. And to our hardworking crew here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, who make Native America Calling possible 5 days a week live to stations all across Indian country, a big thank you. And also to our parent company, Koahnic Broadcast Corporation in Anchorage, Alaska. Appreciate you all and the hard work that you folks do to support Native communities. Have a safe weekend. I'm Sean Spruce.
My name is Tammy, and I'm a member of the Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa Indians. Smoking gave me heart disease. I used to think of cigarette smoking as something that only affected me. Then at just 44 years old, I had to look into my mom's eyes on the way into emergency heart surgery and tell her, "Mommy, I promise I won't make you bury me." My tip is, think about the people in your life who love you. They go through the pain too, maybe even more than you do.
The people you love are worth quitting for. You can quit. For free help, call 1-800-QUIT-NOW. A message from the CDC.
Support for this program is provided by AARP. AARP creates and connects people to unique tools and programs, helps conserve personal resources, and tackles the issues that matter most to individuals, families, and communities. What AARP does might surprise people. For more information and resources, including member benefits, AARP advocacy, and more, go to aarp.org.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.